On the show here. Let's get our little opening logo going here. Clickety clacks. Whoops. Welcome to Evolution Hour. We got a jam-packed show. I don't know whether Jackson will be able to show up as a little bit of chat. We'll see what happens. TortugaandWordPress.com, ye old website. Pay attention to that. You can download all that crap. Exciting world of criticism of creationism. We have Replacing Darwin 51. Some more on Michael or Nathaniel Jensen's Replacing Darwin. Plum, plum, plum. Not as thick a book as mine. We're slogging along the last couple of weeks. As you may recall, we've been looking at some of the genetic papers that Jensen dangled in front of the reader in footnotes. I don't see the chat overlay yet, so I'm not sure that's connecting up. And it's continuing the same route here. And then part 2 will relate to some geology stuff from Tas Walker on Sicker Point. Oh, Tas, you shouldn't have been bringing up Sicker Point. Oh, this was not a good idea. And then a little bit of dangling material, brand new stuff that I'll be putting some link into by Professor Dave, taking a ruthless dismantling of James Tour's biogenesis series. And I was just watching that earlier today, and I go, oh, this is cool. And so I'll be putting a link in for that. And then also a little bit of a summary of the debate that I had over the weekend with Otangelo and primarily Phil Williams on, was Noah's Ark found? Spoiler alert. Wasn't any Noah's flood. Anyway, let me thank our patrons, Hendro, Colton, Eric, Rowley, Sarah, Desi, for our colleagues level, researchers, Travis Adams, Ian Chen, Convert Me, Stephen Early, Neil, James Fitzwater, History Minor, Ralph McFadden, Apologia, Benjamin Simpson, Speed of Sound, assistant researchers, Command Cyborg, Oronku, Jelly, Totus Real, Christopher Johnson, friend Stephen Bauman, Barry Gale Beddoes, Daniel, Insects Are Cool, Morton Nielsen, Paul the Skeptic, Puffaluffagus, Bo, Rasmussen, Devin Reeves, Matt, Alex Stone, and Paul Williams. And Jackson is here. Okay, let's get you on the line. Hi, Jackson. I'm just finishing up the thanking of the patrons here. Jen, Jody, Mike, John, Keith, Andrew, Dyer, Yui, Mona, Brad, Daniel, Nanya, Staggle, Sun Sky Stone, Ugly German Truce, Everett Vincent, and Sir Weisbaum. All of you have helped at one point or another, and I'm going to keep thanking you because it helped at one point or another. So you got a busy plate today. Nathaniel Jensen is continuing walking off the gangplank of bringing up technical papers and then not talking about any of the contents on them. Remember the last couple of weeks, he spittled out a bunch of mitochondrial and DNA papers, of which all 8 of them he was misrepresenting or suppressing information that was relevant in their content, so that wasn't looking good.
Surprise,
Here
surprise.
Here he had stuff on human evolution, of which 2 of the papers were ones he had already cited earlier in the book, as I discovered when I was processing it. And I had not listed them as misrepresentations until we get to this point, because now we're talking a bit more about the content aspect. And one of them that I'll be putting a link to that's open access is a paper from 2001 on Lander that was the initial sequencing and analysis of the human genome, which explicitly referenced the fact that they had identified hundreds of human genes that derive from horizontal gene transfer, and about half of the genome came from transposable elements. And so that would be something that you would think that Jensen should want to have to try to account for.
Why would you want to do that, RJ?
I know. It's silly me thinking that you should want to do that. So move that one over into another little content. Part 2, which I'm jumping into right away because we've probably got more to talk about the non-part 2 stuff than the part 2 stuff, related to a posting that Tas Walker put up that I encountered from April 2013 that was dangled by Answers in Genesis. the Heritage Trail at Sicker Point, Scotland. Ooh,
but RJ, atheism is a religion, and that's all you need to know.
Yes. Well, unfortunately, Sicker Point doesn't help flood geology, as we all know. So I looked into that kind of a little funky one, in particular because Sicker Point and this particular issue with Tas Walker and his misrepresentation of source material, Dapper Dino did a whole video dissecting Tas Walkerisms. And so I'll be putting a link into that little puppy. And some of the way along in this one, he is authority quoting some stuff from Andrew Mile on stratigraphy. And that one, it just turns out to deal with how you judge faster deposition or erosion impact when trying to extrapolate from the observations that you can do in a narrow context with what was going on all through geological time. And that still didn't make the facies issues of layer on layer and paleo environments and all that stuff go away. So that was a mess. And not only that, he even did some authority quoting. Somebody who pops up in creation is quoting a lot over the years, but not much any given week. And that's Derek Ager, who wrote some material way back in the 1990s. He wrote a book called The New Catastrophism, The Importance of the Rare Event in Geological History. And so Ager gets authority quoted. Ooh, catastrophe, that could be the flood. Except Walker didn't quote the whole bloody passage. So it's got a bit about where he's talking about fuddy-duddy old Charles Lyell. For a century and a half, the geological world has been dominated, one might even say brainwashed, by the gradualistic uniformitarianism of Charles Lyell. By the time we get down to the ends of the paragraph, Ager was concluding, I wish to say that nothing in this book should be taken out of context and thought in any way to support the views of the creationists, who I refuse to call scientific. Needless to say, Walker didn't quote that part.
Nope.
Anyway, so I'll be putting the link into Dapper Dino's video on the matter, as well as Walker's stuff. But some stuff that came up just recently proved to be so exciting that I can't resist dealing with it. Number one was the debate I had over the weekend with Jordan against Otangelo, who was basically operating as a potted plant, and Philip White Williams on whether or not the global floods, Noah's Ark, have been found. And Williams is insisting that this very questionable site in Turkey is actually the thing. And anyway, I agreed to be the other person debating. And there, Jordan had actually done a really meticulous job in tracking down an awful lot of stuff about the claims that this site was fraudulent. And of course, Williams was going to deny it. And Otangelo was sitting there in a vague bit. But I found out what I needed to by asking him some probing questions on what this guy's model was. Because Williams is weird. He's not a young Earth creationist, but he's insisting there was a global flood only some 4,300 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. And that it was the same thing as the Ice Age.
Okay.
And that all the evidence of ice ages around the planet are all taking place at the same time.
Wait, hold on. What do you mean?
I know.
What does that mean?
Well, that's what I was trying to pin down, because in one of the earlier debates that he had and Otangelo was playing the role of potted plant in that debate too, with David Neff. He had brought up the Harappa culture of the Indus Valley. And basically, Williams's whole idea is that because megafauna got killed off around the same time, they didn't actually all around the same time. It's spread out, and it's not instantaneous. He doesn't seem to know that. And that there's pottery showing that people who lived around Mount Ararat and the pottery styles of people that were near there were connected, and that was proof for the flood.
Okay.
I know you're going. Pottery, megafauna, global flood, ice age. Where's the
RJ, you
connecting
know the
bridge?
meme of the guy like standing in front of the cork board with all the sticky notes on it and the rubber bands going between the tacks?
that's
That's what that is.
that's above Williams's level. Because I tried to pin him down because he made the mistake of bringing up the Harappa culture in the Indus Valley, which ironically we are going to be discussing in volume 2 of Rocks for There, relating to its decline around this period. It was around 2200 BC, but it was due to monsoon shifting around. There were climate shifts that were going along because of the Younger Dryas impact and all of the climatological material. It wasn't instantaneous. But the thing is that India has other stuff going on other than the Harappa culture. And that would include the Deccan traps over on one side, the volcanic deposits that connect up to the KT extinction, and then the other volcanic deposits on the other end of India that relates to even earlier when it was down by New Zealand, because it was moving across the Indian Ocean. But my kicker was the Ice Age of India that took place in the Silurian period 200 million years ago, when India was parked down next to Antarctica and South America and Africa and Australia, and was occurring with the ice going from the tip of India northwards away from the South Pole. He seriously tried to contend that took place during the Pleistocene.
That is quite a task.
It is. And I was asking for documentation, for which he had none, because every attempt to try to pin him down on any geological material and any source material was just fog bank. And so it was an absolute delight. I'll be putting the link into that little puppy so that everyone get around to that. But something popped up today that was quite delicious. If you're aware, of course, of James Tour, the intelligent design.
Are you talking about the video where the guy was ripping him a new one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw the opening to that. Well, it was in our group right as I was going into work, and I saw the first minute, and I went, "Ooh,
oh yeah!" I was literally finishing stuff up on the first hour because it's divided into 2 parts, and I got to still check the rest of it. Oh, it's juicy woosy. We're going to want to at least allude to that in Rocks too, because he just tears him to shreds. He had already done last year a very serious criticism of basically saying, James Tour, you don't know shit. Anyway, Tour did a 14-episode rebuttal to Dave. And Dave is now replying in kind, plus interviews with some of the scientists reacting to the material. And he's going into greater depth in terms of the technical literature, of which there was quite a slew that was not in my reference bibliography. So that was another time consumer because I'm plugging all of that material in. But 2 of the little quickie take-homes on this is that he flat out, Tour, flat out authority quotes egregiously misrepresenting to Lee Cronin and also some material with Blackman on homochirality stuff, where they're talking about a different topic, and he snips off the thing where the explanation comes in, or takes it out totally out of context on it.
But RJ, he's a synthetic chemist. That means he's right about everything, obviously.
Especially when he raises his voice louder. Because as we all know, if you talk like this, it must be true.
Yes.
And it does explain an awful lot of why Tour doesn't have a sterling reputation in the origins of life community. And it's just some of one thing I really was fascinated with that is the Tour, when he's talking about prebiotic chemistry, those pictures of like a bleak rock-laden landscape, not like oceans where there's like water, where there would be like chemicals in solution that relates to the chemistry work.
Well, now you're trying to make him like actually deal with the data, RJ. We can't have that.
Yeah. which he certainly wasn't doing here, because he simply announces that he listed off a whole slew of chemical compounds that he insisted couldn't possibly be formed in this bleak, rocky landscape. Let me see if I can get down to the quote there. It is it's where did Earth get its chemicals for homochiral synthesis? And he lists off a whole slew of stuff, methane and O2 and carbon dioxide and all. And I'm going, wait a minute, you're arguing that you can't get carbon dioxide naturally?
Yeah,
And
that's a
and
new one on me.
yeah. And so what? Not only did Dave put up several papers that related to quite a few of the examples that on the abiotic and prebiotic formation of those molecules, but I'm deciding I'm going to go through all the ones that weren't directly alluded to find out what the state of the art is. And I've already found some technical literature that relates to all of that. So I'm plugging that into the hole on there. So it's going to be interesting. So absolutely, positively, you want to watch that whole show.
I have it saved on my YouTube. I was walking into work right as I saw that, so
Yeah. I looked at it because I'd seen Dave's prior video, and the fact that Tour went to this such great lengths to offer a commentary piece, but it's all Dave is particularly snarky because he's comparing him to Kent Hovind, because some of the lines of reasoning and argumentation, the idea, well, look, there's just rocks. All you got are like, do you think it came from rocks? But this is perilously close to Kent Hovind style rhetoric.
Yeah.
And that's going way below even, Bradley and some of these others that have written in the intelligent design community. Oh, yes. And another bit that was quite amusing is the tour for trying to drag, when he brings up thermodynamics, and he riffs off of this guy Miller, who, guess what, writes for the Discovery Institute.
Dun dun dun.
Who basically is channeling Granville Sewell's notions about thermodynamics, and he's the only one in the intelligent design community that's just making or trying to make a big deal out of that life somehow or other violates thermodynamics. He's the eccentric in the group, because this normally is a young Earth creationist shibboleth. It's not something that pops up outside of that. You don't see it being thrown at typically the old Earth creationist Fazal Rana branch of things, because they know better.
Yeah.
Holy moly. Anyway, it's a delightful takedown, and it's a marvelous example of source methods at work, because he's got the source linkages in there so everybody can follow up on the stuff, and you don't have to take his word for it. And it does a beautiful job of noting how people can quote things out of context, which Tour is doing. And the main premise is that because he's a synthetic chemist, ergo he knows all about these things.
Yeah. I don't usually get into origin of life stuff because I'm not a chemistry oriented person, but but I do like genetic stuff. And so when Georgia Purdom fires her mouth off about something and it's perilously stupid.
Yeah. Well, Tour has lambasted an awful lot of ones in various contexts, and it's the reason why nobody really is taking him up seriously. But he snipped. There's a long section of Dave's piece on the whole notion of autocatalytic systems, of which there is a monstrously large technical literature about the autocatalytic elements. And basically, Tour just flips it off and says, yeah, irrelevant, doesn't matter. And you can understand why. And but Dave goes even further, pointing out part of the reason why he's flipping it off is that autocatalytic thinking doesn't occur in synthetic chemistry. The kind of work the guy does doesn't deal with autocatalytic systems.
Sure.
And so it's something that isn't in his thing. So all he can imagine is the kinds of laboratory work that he needs to do to make an amino acid turn homochiral. Show it pornography, I guess, something like that. And that he can't imagine, well, how complicated that would be. You'd have to have all of these pieces and the filtration systems and the flasks, how would that happen on the rocky landscape that he shows?
Right.
But that's not what's going on. And the idea that some of the things related to the percentages of stuff, for example, that a particular homochiral element would show up initially as like 1%. And you go, aha, there, that's not, see, that isn't helping at all. But they forget it's an autocatalytic system. So what you have is a system where the ones that aren't autocatalytic aren't doing anything. And the autocatalytic one is amplifying itself and replicating it, increasing its quantity, so that over time it would take over because the non-autocatalytic ones aren't doing that.
Right.
And it just doesn't connect up. You know that if you've seen Pangea, and I don't know if you can see the chat at all. I don't have access to that. It's not showing up here. So, yeah, if there's any people in there, say hi to everybody.
Hello,
if there's
everyone.
familiar names, and
Brian, Scott, Duke, Lisa for Truth, they're all in there.
Yeah, great, because I cannot see the chat, and so I'm not getting any sense. Let me see if even it does any good with the chat overlay. Restream, it's having a conniption fit. It's doing a tour on us. That's what's happening by data selection and misrepresentation of source material. Anyway, so there's a really wonderful section on the dynamics of autocatalytic systems and how homochirality can generate. And there was a bunch of new papers and work that I had some people on, and a lot of their work in other areas. And some of the works, a brand new paper from 2020, which is a review of autocatalytics. There's even a journal now devoted to the subject.
Oh, well, so, that's a little bit of research then, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's got an awful lot of material, and I'm anticipating the second volume where there's other interviews with other of these people that are giving their reactions. Lee Cronin was nicked where he had was answering an interviewer's question on origin of life, and the interviewer said, well, am I getting the chemistry wrong, that there's like the primordial soup and then there's like lightning coming down? I mean, is that a misrepresentation? And have I got all my chemistry wrong? And the guy says, well, yeah, pretty much you have it right. The chemistry is basic. And that's where Tour nicked the thing and excoriated Cronin for that. And didn't get to the next sentence where there was the but part, where he was explaining why that was basically a cartoon oversimplification and that the work is much more sophisticated these days. And so Cronin was asked explicitly by Dave on a Zoom link, what was his opinion of Tour doing that? And he said it was an outrageous misrepresentation. Duh. So he's kind of pissed off on it. Maybe Tour will do a 28-part episode series excoriating Cronin now. I don't know. We'll see.
Don't say that too loud, RJ. He might hear you. But I mean, yeah, that was sort of the way it was thought in the 20s and 30s, the Oprah and Haldane model.
Yeah.
But
they had nothing else to go on.
Well,
they didn't even know about deep sea thermal vents. They didn't even know there was a mid-Atlantic ridge. I mean, how could they have incorporated that into their models?
Right. Yeah. And what we know about the geochemistry is not quite the same anymore. And there's been lots of other, there are numerous more steps involved in the process than that now. And so, all of which the researchers know, and Tour didn't want his audience to know.
Exactly. Well, I think in part Tour doesn't even explore it. I noted a thing quite independently of where there was oh God, it's not selenocysteine. It's a word that and ironically Tour used a term for it that's idiosyncratic. It's kind of the way old British literature would refer to this particular molecule. So I realized it was actually a different molecule when you were Googling it to find out what the hell it was, because I looked up what the Wikipedia section was on it, and I apologize for not remembering what the damn molecule was.
It's okay, RJ. We forgive
you. Anyway, if you read, it was in the criticism he was leveling against John Sutherland, who, after all, is doing really groundbreaking work on prebiotic systems, and it's just some really wonderful material. Anyway, he was taking them on with one of the papers that I think either appeared in Science or PNAS. I can't remember whether it was one of the main technical journals. And Tour was insisting that this one component couldn't possibly be sustained in a prebiotic context. It would disintegrate too quickly.
Okay.
And when I looked up the molecule, I discovered that it's a significant constituency as a tracer in, I think, the atmosphere of Titan, one of the outer moons, which suggests that there is an abiotic way to make that molecule.
Oops.
unless you're arguing and do it sustainably, even without sunlight. Because that's kind of nippy out there in the gas giants. It's not exactly warm out there.
Yeah.
And so I don't think he bothered studying up on an awful lot of this stuff. What he's doing is authority quoting and selected material. And then, of course, he becomes the authority figure and metastasizes because you find him being brought up by all sorts of people online across the spectrum, from intelligent design all the way into young earth creationism, waving Tour at me as the guy that's disproven abiogenesis.
Yeah.
And
I mean, RJ, we've never seen anti-evolutionists who just authority quote people and get it wrong.
No, I never do that.
That never happens.
And it's actually the fascinating thing about it is that many of them are proud of authority quoting.
Yes.
That you find a network of ones. There's people at Reason and something or other website. Ray Bolin and that bunch. It's partly responsible for Pandas and People, that network. And also John Ankerberg falls into that category. The late Henry Morris was pathological. He would write entire books out of their own mouths, kind of thing.
Yeah. I was about to say, isn't there like a whole book that's just quote minds of evolutionists?
Yeah. And this actually, you find this not all that common in other wackaloonery, that you don't necessarily find the quote mine list. The closest you can get to it is a cousin in climate science, where you can find some quote mines on that stuff. But it's on steroids. The Olympic Games of quote mining occurs in relation to evolution, where this has been going back quite a long time. You even find this as a practice going back into anti-evolution books that were written back in the 1920s and 30s.
I have a 1960s creationist book with lots of quote mines.
Yeah, and so jump back 40 years earlier, and they were still functionally doing that, because the idea was that they would read. See, the quote miner is somebody that's scavenging current media. They tend to be reading popularization books rather than technical literature. I think if they want to have a cottage industry for their PhD or something, or their master's thesis, would be to go through and follow up the provenance of the distribution of where authority quoting has come from. Just going off of my own memory of the things, the odds are an authority quote will not be from a technical paper. It will probably be by the book the person wrote about it when they were past retirement, where they're giving their summary bit, or they're doing it for a popular audience. So you find stuff on geology. You find a material that Ager book is not a technical one. It's a more generic book. Yeah. And same way with Degrassi, that he's one of the most notorious quotes, and it's a misrepresentation quote to boot. And Bonheur, that's another one who's actually, the quote was never said at all. It was spliced together from a couple different sources and all of that. Well, and so that's when, go ahead.
Yeah, like a sentence starts on one page, ... ends on a later page.
Oh, yeah, that's another one where I give people as a litmus test element, that if you see a quote and it's got an ellipsis ... in it, that should immediately get your warning flags going. Now, it may be that relatively little was chopped out, especially if it was nicked from a technical paper. The odds are that all they've done is remove the sources that were alluded to in the bit, or some secondary clause. If it's from a book, it's much more likely that they're removing stuff And the notorious example that I love, and I think I alluded to it in chapter 4 or 5 of the old tip. So go to my website and download that PDF to get in there. It had to do with Philip Johnson's misrepresentation of the Weinberg quote, where he was going on, or maybe it was in chapter 6, because it had to do with religion, because Weinberg was making a point about the idea of falsifiability in science. And if you find any little tiny thing that isn't explained at a particular time, that throws out the whole theory. And there's this long passage that Johnson quoted, I think, in Reason in the Balance, which was his 1995 book. And there was one little teeny dot in the middle. Well, this is a passage that runs almost a page, and he's got a dot in it, and that piqued my curiosity. I had slipped through it when I had read the book earlier, and it was entirely on a completely different subject, because I think I was checking, because Johnson had a problem spelling Stephen Jay Gould's name. Sometimes it was Stephen with a V, and sometimes it was Stephen with a PH. And so I was checking in the book to find out which way he spelled the name in this particular quote that I had remembered. And along the way, I happened to stumble on this Weinberg thing that I hadn't really paid attention to before. And that's when the ... jumped out at me. By now, I was attuned to source methods in a way that I wasn't when I'd read the book years earlier. And so I found the original book, which was also at the library. Just a general book Weinberg had written on the philosophy of things. It had the quote in it, by the way. I think it was the book where he was saying that for bad people to do bad things, they do that on their own. But for good people to do bad things, you need religion.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And I think that was from that book. But anyway, turns out that only one short sentence was excised in that ... from a long paragraph, multiple paragraphs that he had in there, and he nicks one little sentence out. Now it piques my curiosity. Why does he remove the sentence? Because it said a really awful thing for Johnson's argument. That if Johnson's idea of falsifiability, that anything that can't be explained at the moment is thrown out, the whole theory, he said, no scientific theory can withstand that, including Isaac Newton.
Yeah.
So Johnson didn't want his readers to know that if you follow Johnson's approach to science, you demolished the last 300 years of physics history.
Oh yeah, cell biology and atomic theory and gravity. Yeah, everything goes out the window.
Nothing explains everything.
Right.
And by that argument, once you had discovered that the perihelion of Mercury was professing, you would not only have thrown out Newton's whole hog, but you would have not replaced it with anything necessarily, because intelligent design doesn't replace anything. Oh, speaking of up in ante, another one that popped up, I didn't allude to it I won't be putting a reference in on it because I still got to look up on the stuff, but we of course are aware of the cute little guy, Richard Bugs, that we discussed in Rocks Volume 1, bing, 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 in relation to Paul Nelson and the genetic coding issue, and the relating to orphan genes. Well, he's back at it, going at Richard Dawkins.
Yay. Because Dawkins is always doing research.
Yeah. He was tweet linking to this this morning, and so I don't have a link to it that I'll be putting in, but I'll close it to the camera so anybody can take a look at the cute little thing. It's on his Nature Eco community, nature.com, which sounds awfully official, but basically it's the blog that the various scientists and people at Nature magazine pay attention to, and so it's not exactly an official website, but anyway, he's going on about the bacterial flagellum, and he's just browbeating. In 2006 book, The God Delusion, Richard Dawkins gave prominent place to a particular scenario for the evolution of the bacterial flagellar motors, which relates to the type 3 secretion system. And this is not a news bulletin. This thing has been an intelligent design bugbear for years. So I'm going yawn. It's what is their relationship between the type 3 secretion system and the bacterial flagellum? And I think it's pretty well understood that it's definitely not that the type 3 flagellum system evolved into the flagellum. The type 3 secretion system, what they were arguing is, based on the genetics, that the type 3 secretion system was importing the secretion module from the flagellum to other organisms. And so it was the other direction. That was the main line of argument. And Bill Dembski, these all people have all battered on this for years. Well, these new papers, this is a brand new one from Cell that hasn't even hit publication yet, so I can't get the full text on it. But it's basically arguing that when you look at the fiddly-bit details, that you've got an even more complicated situation. That the flagellar motor is composed of 34 FLIF subunits with mixed internal symmetries. Therefore, the flagellar motor has evolved special structural elements for bacterial motility. Like, duh.
Okay.
that what you've got is that there's even less of a direct similarity between the type 3 secretion system that's in the flagellum than the ones that's known as the type 3 secretion system. And we'll see how this is going to impact the idea of what happened after that. I tweeted to Bugs and do not expect to get an answer on it. But can you put forward a model of what you think happened? Are you arguing that the precursor system to a flagellum can't possibly be an exporting system? Because it is an exporting system. That's how it makes the flagellum part that makes the thing. And in fact, that there are examples of that flagellar system that when it just is squishing out flagellin, the stuff that the flagellum is made of, that triggers an interleukin response. And so it's actually potentially an offensive weapon system for invading a biological environment by dumping all this flagellum in there. The issue of how that happened to eventually turn into a thing that wiggled involves all these extra other proteins and all this other environment. And my guesstimation, based on what over the years of reading on this, and also what's been coming up on research in the last 20 years that are transforming our understanding of the boring billions before the Cambrian explosion, is that I bet we're seeing the tip of the iceberg of a biological process that took a long time to do, in the tens of millions of years or more, that involved a now extinct interaction of organisms, some of which their branches may also have been extinct. So we're only seeing the little tips of the icebergs in the various bacteria that have the flagellum and the various other elements of what things branch off into.
Right.
And I don't think Bugs, who is, by the way, a plant biologist, plant geneticist, is going to be thinking a hell of a lot on this. And the fact that he's bringing this subject up at all, he never alludes to design. So far, in any of his tweets, he keeps that clear. But we know from his work with Paul Nelson isn't somebody he bumped into on a street corner somewhere and said, hey, let's do a paper on orphan genes. And you recall that they worded everything so bloody carefully that it's all about, ooh, look at the doubts, look at the problems, look at the explanation problems, ooh, problems. Never once mentioning what their model was, never once mentioning any design claims, and that's why it got in a conventional journal. Because of all of that, it's just, ooh, isn't this puzzling? Isn't this difficult? And all the rest. And needless to say, never mentioning, oh, by the way, co-author Paul Nelson thinks the Earth is only 6,000 years old.
Right.
Now, I don't know what Bugs thinks. There's nothing to indicate in any of his writing that he doubts the age of the Earth. I think he's still thinking the Cretaceous is a long time ago for the development of angiosperms. But he's been doing these little dangling problems in front of you kinds of bits that's operating at a higher level than what ICR and AIG do in their context, or and not explicitly snarking on it in the way that Casey Luskin used to do, and David Kopech still does in that vomitously massive website of his, that Creation Evo information thing, which he will spit out on a minimum one a day and sometimes more. So basically, every technical paper on Earth will get snark from David Kopej, and you would have to wonder, in fact, how far down the totem pole would a paper need to be not to have Kopej snark at?
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, so I had been looking into a little bit that it's I'll put a little, since I'm not giving a link to it, but it's actually a useful graphic because there's a thing from the technical paper about the difference in structure, because this is the first detailed structural mapping of the flagellum, and they were comparing it with the type 3 secretion system. And there is the paper, Structural Basis of Assembly and Torque Transmission of the Bacterial Flagellar Motor, and you'll see there's a whole bunch of lines down below because it hasn't hit publication yet. So that eventually will get filled in. Hopefully, by the time we get to the completion of Rocks Were There Volume 2, that dust will have settled, and we may possibly be including this as a little thing to discuss in a footnote somewhere or other in like Chapter 1 and all the rest. So here we are at 7:40. What's been going on with you, kid, there in the world of Louisiana?
It's finals week, RJ.
Whoa, pressure.
Yeah,
Nope,
I know.
no pressure.
I have one. See, I finished one of my finals already. That's the biostats one. So fun. It's all like as I think you said the other day. Extremely important but terribly boring was the way you described it.
Yeah, which is often true of any of that thing. And if you have a mathematically oriented mind, the mathematics takes on a life of its own.
Yeah.
And so nothing is more exhilarating than, a summation symbol and an integral sign. And you see things in different ways because you think mathematically.
Well,
my brain doesn't get to that level.
Well, fortunately, it's less about having to figure out the math and more, okay, how many independent and dependent variables do we have, and which analysis do we do that, or which button do we press when we put the data into SPSS? So it just does everything for us. Oh, and then I have my dinosaurs test on Friday, so a test on dinosaurs. I was bred for this.
Yes, our dear pals of dinosaurs. Yeah, they're an extremely useful one to be familiar with. First of all, because the paleontology is so enormous now, and we've got a level of analysis in paleobiogeography and all that other stuff that just puts to shame what was being understood a generation ago.
Yeah,
and most of the technical literature that you would need to draw on is open access somewhere or other on a level that wasn't the case before. So you got models available. I collect dinosaur models among other things, and I just sorted out in the great sorting. I got all my shelves and that rearranged, and I finally sorted all the carnosaurs out by systematic logic. So all allosaurs are together, and all ceratosaur groups, the early a bunch in that bunch, and then the tyrannosaur maniraptoran bunch on its own little shelf, and that makes it clearer to see what's connected up to other. Because otherwise all you're seeing is that there's a critter on hind legs with a tail and arms and teeth. And you would tend back even as much as to go down memory lane. Even a book from the mid-1980s, like David Norman, who's mainly an iguanodontid researcher, and he's still around, and wrote a wonderful book. That encyclopedia of his just lumped carnosaurs as a blob because they had very little clarification on that. All the new breed of Pulsarino systematics people upset everything, and they were like, no, you've actually got 3 distinct lineages, and that allosaurs are not in the same group as tyrannosaurs.
My prehistoric organism toys are organized by time period, by geologic period, rather than by systematics.
Yeah. Well, I had done that to a certain extent. Well, in fact, at one stage, I made some giant paleo maps, and this was in an era when people still had Polaroid instant cameras. So I would lay all my little dinosaurs out on the map for the Jurassic and the Cretaceous period. I think I had 2 for the Cretaceous because the different things and the continental distributions and stuff as best I could do. And it was all a big baseboard about 3 by 5, something like that feet. So I mean, it was a good sized thing. and I could physically lay the dinosaurs out on it, and I had so many of them that it would fill up a lot of the boards, and then I would just take a photograph of it. And so I would have a little doodad that way. Nowadays, you do it with a smartphone or something else. Anyway, maps went to good use because I gave them to my niece for her Montessori school, so that would show the things to their little class, because they have little bits about dinosaurs and all that kind of stuff in that little bit. We want, even at that early stage, to have a clear understanding about how some of the things had changed and that the world had altered and all that.
I saw on Twitter once, and I don't know if anyone can ever find it, but I thought it was amazing. Someone had organized their, I believe it was their Schleich mammal or prehistoric mammal toys. They had organized them by systematics. So in their living room,
sounds like Brian Naish. He would do that.
I don't think it was him, but I think he retweeted it. He was retweeting someone else who did it.
He has like an overload of collection. I mean, every once in a while he puts pictures up of his collections of stuff.
Well,
and every imaginable critter, marine creatures, mammals, and all the rest, and they are just a glut of them. You go, holy shit, kid, you've got a lot of time on your hands.
Yeah, he's got like 3 cabinets just full of his toys. But this person had
done dioramas at times.
This person had taken tape and taped out a phylogeny on their floor and had put their toys like that. Wow. And he actually retweeted it because that's where I saw it. But it was pretty amazing. Yeah.
Well, I can easily appreciate that, because I began to realize that in order to understand what was going on with them, you needed to have a sense of their systematic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so that on one of the shelves in my thing is all the ceratopsids and the psittacosaurid model that I've got, and the protoceratopsids, and also the pachycephalosaurs, because that's all in a group of close cousins. And in the same way, I think I put the hippopotamus near the horse and the zebra and stuff in my little collection up on the top shelf of my relatively minor amounts of mammals, because they're related. And you put all the elephants and mastodons and all that together as a grouping. And it clarifies elements of them in a way that you wouldn't detail otherwise. And you could do that now because the systematics have advanced. About the only thing that's unclear with dinosaurs are the very deep roots, because the critters at that stage all look so damned alike.
Yeah, what a surprise.
That you've got basically a teeter-totter critter with a long tail on 2 legs with arms, and some of those are going off into the Herrerasaurs, which turn maybe into the Sauropodomorphas, and who knows what's going on in there, because we don't have enough. So much of that's taking place during the Triassic, and you have relatively few Triassic deposits. It's a relatively short period geologically, and there are very few deposits to look at. And so the Ishkualasto down in Argentina, and that is one of the biggies.
The
and it's no coincidence
Formation in Arizona.
Yeah, and even there, you've only got fragmentary blips of things. To where you may have a bunch of one type of thing, but you have a lot of information, and you go, well, what was going on over the next mountain range? We don't know. Because we don't have Triassic rock exposed. We could excavate the entire planet, I suppose, and clarify a lot of this. But
I mean, we might get into a little bit of trouble when we approach, cities like, hey, we need to get under there.
Hey, Chicago, move over.
But you mentioned that the systematics is important, because in my thesis work, the systematics has changed. Some of the papers written on it in the 1980s proposed one relationship, which was kind of accepted for a while, but that was based on morphology, because genetics wasn't majorly done yet. And so now we have big genetic sequences from some of these guys, and it helped elucidate a lot of the biogeography also.
Because when you remember, you're looking at the morphology. Morphology permits you to look at extinct forms because you've got fossil record for some of the things. But you have to remember the map of time, so that what you've got is blip here and blip there and blip there. and there's a massive fog that you don't know exactly because you only have the blip, blip, blip. And that penumbra always has to be kept in mind, and that you would then be led astray, especially if you have a really bad set of blips, very few, for some branches in the grouping. That means that's going to completely skew what you think is related to what, because you don't have a broader representation of how much variety is going on. Now,
Yeah.
the genetics, again, you're only looking at the extant organism, but every one of them is a broad, detailed analysis of all the baggage the individual organism is carrying around with it. And since no organism on the planet invents its whole thing, all the information in it, cold turkey. No, it's an inheritance of an inheritance of an inheritance with modification, modification, modification over time. And you can actually, in many ways, get a tighter focal point on the genealogy of an extant organism because of that genetics. Once you understood what all the genes did.
Right. And that's also one thing that hasn't been done super big in the group that I'm going to be studying is there's not really a lot of genetics. The only genetics that has been done is looking for sort of phylogenetic signals in particular genes, but not really what genes are doing what in the organisms.
And the absolute poster child for what future things and how little we know in certain areas would have to be the ants, where you got 20,000 species of ants that are distinguished from fossil cousins exclusively by a single feature, the metapleural gland, which is a tiny little gland on its butt, for which nobody knows what it does, for which there's been only a tiny amount of work relating to 6 of the 20,000 species of ants, and no genetic work has been done on what genes are involved in the metapleural gland. So no wonder there's a certain degree of uncertainty about some aspects of ant phylogeny by virtue of the fact that the defining characteristic has a bunch of question marks attached to it.
I mean, sadly, that's true for an inordinate number of different insect clades. There's just big question because researchers, well, so many researchers, because you get, movies and like documentaries and you get shown in the presses. Look, I studied a mammal or a bird or a flower. Most people are like, "Oh, you study bugs."
Yeah. Well, okay. And think about it. For those of you who recall, very few ants are terribly large, and the ones, for example, the ones that live out in watch the movie Them to show the dangers of giant ants. Not a good idea.
Yeah.
Anyway, they're astrigulating. It's a marvelous movie, by the way. You should see that. Edmund Gwenn and all that from 1954. Warner Brothers, a wonderful movie score with Dmitri Tiomkin, or Bronislaw Kaper, I think, wrote the music for it. Anyway, it's a really grippingly good science fiction story. But the thing is about the ant. Think about the average ant, the ones that live out in the giant nest in my yard. Every once in a while, they come out for sunning, and you'll see this explosion about yay big of zillions of little teeny ants that are out there warming in the sun. And there's no point trying to get rid of the damn things. They're indestructible. So, you just make sure they don't get in the house and you're happy. You stay outside, we stay inside, never the twain shall meet. But they're tiny little ants. And so I think they're smaller than a grain of rice. They're little itty bitty. Think about how difficult it would be, first of all, to collect ants, put them in a little ant restraint harness, look at them in the microscope to look at their butt, and look at the butt to try to find the metapleural gland, and to then find out what the metapleural gland excretes and collect it up in a little teeny little vial. I mean, the moment you start thinking about sheer mechanics of studying any individual ant species, let alone 20,000 of them, you can realize that it's not exactly a shocker why that aspect of its biology is not well characterized.
Yeah, it starts to make sense, yes.
Yeah, and that's true for an all, and it's when you move over into anti-evolution land, you know well enough from the readings that you've done already, and I know it from my own experience. Boy, anti-evolutionists don't like thinking about all those things that are so small you can't see them without a microscope.
No. No. Oh, and apparently Michael Behe doesn't like thinking about it either, because he just outright said on Dan's channel, I don't really care about bacteria
Yeah.
or viruses. It's like,
Well, it's even
okay.
worse than that. When I challenged him on the whale matter, and I think I've described this in either chapter 4 or 5 in the book that you can get downloaded, it's the old Troubles in Paradise thing. Anyway, this was following the firing line debate that took place on Buckley's show in the 1990s. And I was probing him a couple of years later about, it turned out he was the guy that was funneling whale evolution information to Philip Johnson. And so Behe was actually the point guy here. So I was asking him about what would a transitional whale look like, for example, and all of that. And he flat out answered me, I don't care.
Yeah.
Well, that's a beacon of curiosity, isn't it?
I mean, and these are the guys who are like, intelligent design is more scientific and it's replacing evolution, and I really don't care. Don't ask me questions. Leave me alone, please.
Yeah, Casey Luskin, what's really hilarious is like somebody like Casey Luskin in the Discovery Institute, in that period from about 2000, and it starts petering out by 2005. But there was such a heady enthusiasm amongst them during that period. They were predicting the imminent demise of evolution, and the Discovery Institute's version of intelligent design was going to be sweeping all the applications in paleontology and biology and all of that. And we're looking at it from 2021 going, oh, really?
Really? I mean, it's the same as every end times, person. So
yeah, it's just a non starter, and you get the same elements with I just happened to be in the great sorting there. I found a piece from, I think, the Saturday Review from like 1979, which is a general magazine, and they were talking about the sudden upsurge of creation scientists, and it was becoming the biggest minority, fastest growing minority group in the sciences. And I'm going, no, not really. And it certainly did not have the intended effect of taking over the scientific community. And so if you read, and by the time then you get down to the 1990s, that's 20 years later. Now it's the intelligent designers who are just ever so sure that they're on the cusp of the revolution. And like Martin Luther persuading the Jews to convert to Christianity, once the evidence of the thing is presented to them, why they'll all turn around and junk their sterile, useless Darwinian dogmas for the fantastically productive world of intelligent design, which hasn't been able to produce a damn thing all of these decades.
Yeah, you gotta wonder how much of that is just pure narcissism.
Well, yeah, partly they operate in a very narrow frame. I mean, you remember Michael Behe is not writing technical papers and presenting them at conferences. That he's a tenured professor, so he's still doing his shtick. The rest of the departments just pretend he isn't there. And what he writes is books. I'll give him this. He's been more productive in the book department than the average low anti-evolutionist is on the Discovery Institute side. Luskin never really ended up writing anything other than a couple how-to manual compilations of why intelligent design is wonderful. And he's disappeared off the scope completely. There's been ones that write ideological books, Flannery and a few others in that area deal with stuff. But Behe has managed to churn out, I think he's into his 4th or 5th book now. He had one that just came out a little bit ago, and he's got another one pending.
Yeah, he's
basically
got one
it's
on
the
the
same
way.
shtick. It's just book versions of the same kind of stuff. Michael Denton managed just to do the big 3, and then some videos on eyeballs and that sort of thing. And so they've gone into that mode where basically they function as talking heads.
I loved that when Behe was on Dan's video, that Dan was asking, okay, between the flagellum, which is definitely designed, and between the citrate metabolism, which is definitely not designed. Where's the line? And B, he just said, wait for my next book. But
yeah, well,
but you've been doing this for 20 years, at least
exactly.
20 years.
I'd love to see what he pointedly said back around 2002 or so when he was being pressed on it, I think by Ken Miller and others, about the Krebs cycle. Because the Krebs cycle, if you knew less about it, might be thought of as an irreducibly complex system by the definitions that they were using. Mm-hmm. And he pointedly punted by saying, I'm not claiming the Krebs cycle is irreducibly complex. Well, good for you. It's because we know too much about it, don't we? And that's why when I wrote my chapter of the Creationism Light chapter at the website that you can download, I went through all of the 5 irreducibly complex examples that Behe offered, and every single one of them had we don't know about them that were buried in the footnotes, him admitting that we didn't know about this and this and this and this and this. So the idea that, we know so much about each one of these systems to be able to state categorically that it could not possibly be developed in that way. And to see worse, when you get down now to 2021, when you're bumping into Standing for Truth or Otangelo, for example, when they bring up irreducible complexity, they're not using the examples that Behe brought up.
Yeah, well, I mean, everything is irreducibly complex if you think about it. But also, I mean, the other thing I thought was funny is there are technically in biology things that are irreducibly complex, like the citrate metabolism example, because you have 2 mutations which only fulfill this job if they're together. So this is an irreducibly complex structure coming about through evolution.
From acceptations and the whole others. And it's no coincidence that anti-evolutionists have a big problem with co-opting and acceptation. They don't even like to use the word except to sneer at it.
Yeah.
And so the ghost of Stephen Jay Gould, who coined the term acceptation, is looking over our shoulder all the time saying, told you so, told you so.
Yeah, it was yeah, it was pretty funny, but that was another thing where he just kind of went, I don't care.
Yeah. The lack of curiosity is absolutely astonishing. This was a thing that other than the gee whiz quality about it, which is, look at organism X, and it's so complicated and beautiful, and therefore, see, there's the Lord's handiwork of making this parasitical organism or this carnivorous flower or this fill in the blank, and it's got complicated stuff. It does stuff, and therefore, wow. And that's as far as it goes. At that point, the brain shuts down. There's no attempt to work out any organized systematics or whatever. And it's not as though anti-evolutionists haven't had time to do it. That it's fair to say that there have been just as many anti-evolutionists from 1859 to the present as there would be working scientists in the field in that same time frame. It just is that none of them either know enough about any of the topics or have any model to apply, which I think is far more serious difficulty. And as was pointed out about plant evolution, is that before Darwin came along, plants were there was like the catalogers thing, that they would be like, as if you tried to study automobiles just by marking down the size of the bolts that are used on them. I mean, you're just looking at minutia and making lists, but nothing connected to anything until Darwin. And that's one of the reasons why Asa Gray and other plant people just went hog wild in that. They go, this makes sense now.
Neil, the 604 atheist, said he got our book, RJ.
Oh, yeah. Be sure to let us know what you think of it. And be certain to write a review up on it at some point and tell everybody. Because remember, if a few more million people buy the books, we will not complain.
I mean, yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah, that's I don't care if nobody reads the book. We want everybody on the planet to have a copy of it. That would be a paraphrase of Sam Goldman which at one point he said, I don't care if we don't make on time on this movie. I want everybody to see it. Which, if everybody sees it, they're actually going to be making a lot of dimes.
Yeah.
So, I'm just getting another one of my stupid computer wants to put up a restart to stay up to date. The damn Windows updating right in the middle of my thing. So anyway, we're past the hour.
Yeah.
Do you have any last blurbs you want to say, everybody? Let me do while you're saying your blurbs, I'll put our advert for the book up, and we'll get that organized.
Blurb, 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 blurb.
Blurb, 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 blurb. Yes, the way it goes. Yes. The old line that you get from a drama department. God damn it, that window is stuck in the way. Get out of the way here. Yes. There we go. I'm trying to put my little thing to get my screen in so I can get my screen share, and the damn window is stuck in the way. Very annoying windows. That's the way they construct everything to be as inconvenient as possible. We know that. And what would you expect from Bill Gates? Okay, let's get our little rock through their commercial going up in here. Screen share, blah, blah, blah. There we go. So, as everybody knows, we've written a book. The rocks were there. Volume 1. There will be a volume 2. We're very, 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 very proud of it. It was damn fun to write. And we all learned an enormous amount and collated an awful lot of stuff in the course of it. I think it's a genuinely useful contribution to the literature that if you want to know how to answer a creationist, well, were you there? The rocks were there. And that's the basic shtick. It's as simple as that. So put there, and I think that pretty well covers the bit. You can get that at Amazon. I put the links into both that and the other book, my own little tome, the Evolution Slam Dunk on the Reptile Mammal Transition, in there. And we will be doing more in that bit. Anybody that wants to tackle the subject and write a book on the subject, we can do it. So, and after all, Standing for Truth and Raw Matt have done books.
Yeah, books, quote.
In books. Well, they have paper.
Oh.
And they have ink on them. And so they're books.
Atheist Ed says, before we debate evolution deniers, we should first ask them to explain the process. Well, as it happens, this Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern, RJ and I will be on Vandalia. This is 1998. We'll be on his channel talking about different forms of selection, natural selection, sexual selection, and artificial selection.
Yeah. And, and the limits and the implications of all of that. Jackson has a PowerPoint.
You said, "Oh, hey, you like my last PowerPoint," so I thought, "Why not?"
Oh yeah, and your choice of imagery and all of that stuff is absolutely magnificent. I'll be bringing in some of the historical aspects of it. The fact that Darwin was very avant-garde theoretically in the fact that he was bringing up that whole notion of sexual selection, and for uptight Victorians, that was kind of weird. And even Alfred Wallace had problems with sexual selection. He was exclusively a natural selection obsessive on there. And that stayed kind of the subterranean subject, really, until people in the Gould era started reminding people of it. And since the 1980s on, sexual selection has gotten back into the field with a vengeance. And has been, so we'll be going into all of that shit. So we can go partly, we're going to be talking about sexual.
Yeah, it's very there's a good book, The Evolution of Beauty by Richard Prum. If you guys haven't read it, it's a pretty good book. Check out. It's about sexual
Jerry
selection.
Coyne dumped on some of its aspects and all of that. So but then again, Jerry Coyne will have a tendency to do that.
I mean,
he's kind of the great reflector of the standard biological model.
Yeah, I mean, Jerry Coyne, I'm willing to bet falls in the sort of the Wallace world rather than the Darwin side of that, where sexual selection is really just extra natural selection rather than
and in fact that's exactly his attitude on a lot of the notions about rethinking the neo-Darwinian synthesis, or do we need some new synthesis bit?
Right.
Is that he says, everything they're doing is valid, It just is. It's all still part of the old one with just some wrinkles. And
Right.
so you could argue that there's the kinds that see the cutting edges as so moved on from where they were 10 or 15 years ago that it deserves a new box in your head, versus the ones that are seeing everything from another perspective where we go, no, that's just a logical implication of this thread and this thread and this thread.
Right.
And so I think ultimately it relates just to the temperament of the scientists involved. Some people it's the equivalent of the lumpers versus the splitters, except at a category level, to where some people are thrown off differently. Like it would be the thing that if somebody were being anal retentive about musical movies, between musicals that are based on Broadway plays versus ones that are original Hollywood ones, and ones in which there is a chorus group as opposed to a non-dancing, and that, that you go too much detail. It's all musicals, kids.
Right.
And then the other one comes along and says it's all movies, and so that categorization issue, I think ultimately it's fun and annoying at the same time, because you'll have this hair-splitting picayune bit. And remember, almost every one of these little mini controversies gets fed on parasitically by anti-evolutionists who want to come in and go, see, the paradigm is in peril because there was a conference where Gert Mueller had this to say about epigenetics. And you're going, ah! And you're going, no.
Yeah, some of that Gerd Mueller stuff where he was like, "Oh, Dickinsonia is like inflated new or whatever it was." It's like, what?
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
That's part of what, and this goes back to the scholarly methods aspect, is that authority quoters and secondary parasites are just trawling for ammunition, rather than reading what the whole paper was about and what the whole scientist is thinking and what their general position is and how that fits into this. So their big nested hierarchy that they would need to do just for the systematics of the writing, I, in some ways, am into that already, because I was trained in historiography, which is the study of historians. So you would know different historians had different views over time and how that's changed, and different predilections over periods. Well, exactly the same thing goes on in the sciences, or for that matter, in the fashions of car design or any other discipline you would want to do. There are counterparts of that structurally. And those are the sorts of topics which, when you get geeks talking about it, that's when you run for the hills, because it can be bone-crushingly boring material to outsiders.
Yep.
Okay, well, we put our commercial spot up, and thanks everybody that I couldn't see in the chat overlay, but thank Jackson for acting as point person to at least convey some of that stuff. Stay safe, everybody. There are way too many wackaloons, as we've been seeing in India, where vigilance and thinking, well, that's over, we've conquered it, we can go back to our giant mass rallies and religious groups on the Ganges. Uh-oh. And now they literally have mass crematorium on side streets all the time, because it's completely out of control again. The little virus doesn't care about your politics or your religion. It only cares about crowd density and getting to the next vector. Yeah. And I want to get back to more normality, which means wear your mask, get the poke vaccine. I know this is one way to get rid of Republicans, by the fact that so many Republicans don't want to get the vaccine, but I'd say even to you idiots, get the damn vaccine. You were bitching about Trump getting it done in hyper fast. Well, don't you want to use it now? So there we go. And plus, you don't want to kill your grandma.
And that is natural selection. Thank you.
And that is that. We want fewer potential Darwin Award winners coming out of this experience.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, see y'all next week. Stay safe, everybody, and